Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to the History Squad. Now, today's video is about Elizabeth I, old good Queen Bess of England, and the many assassination attempts and the plots against her life. Did you know in December 1583, she actually wrote to the French ambassador? She says there are more than 200 men of all ages who, at the instigation of the Jesuits, conspire to kill me. She wasn't exaggerating, because I've gone through just a handful and it blows your mind. So we're going to take a quick overview of her life and delve into some of the plots to kill her. Elizabeth I, Queen of England. Good Queen Bess, as she was affectionately known. She was born on the 7th of September 1533, the daughter of Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Now, she was only 5'4", slim build, a bit of a dutz, as we would say in South Wales. Her hair was red with gold flecks in it. Her skin was pale, but she would have had freckles, so I've heard, but she covered them up with makeup, as the fashion of the day, the pale skin. Her hands were quite long, with slender, long fingers. Her eyes, according to portraits, were brown with gold flecks in them. When Anne Boleyn was executed, her daughter Elizabeth was only 2 years, 8 months old, but she wouldn't have known her mother that much. Now, when she was older, in 1554, she was imprisoned in the Tower of London. She'd been implicated in the Wyatt's Rebellion, which was an uprising whose aim it was to prevent Queen Mary of England, Elizabeth's half-sister, from marrying Prince Philip of Spain, a foreigner, and together they would have returned England to the Catholic Church. However, Elizabeth comes to the throne herself at the age of 25 in 1558. Things are going fine until she is excommunicated by the Pope. This is February 1570. And it basically says that this papal bull, that any Catholics who show loyalty to the Queen Elizabeth will also be excommunicated, and called upon the Catholics to remove her from the throne. Now, that's coded, really, isn't it? What do they mean, remove her from the throne? Just take her away, imprison her, kill her? Well, that papal bull wasn't that popular with the Catholics who lived in England, and some of the Scottish ones as well. But the Pope was hoping that Catholics from Ireland, Catholics from England, Wales, Scotland would actually unite together. But the Catholics of France and Spain, well, they weren't too sure this was a good thing. However, what happens now throughout her life is really interesting, because we get down to the plots and the assassination attempts, because they all appear to happen after the papal bull. So the first plot we're going to look at is the Ridolfi plot. Roberto Ridolfi, a Florentine banker. Now, he was involved in the Northern Rebellion in 1569, which was another plot to overthrow Queen Elizabeth I, good old Queen Bess there, and replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots. But that had failed. So now Ridolfi hasn't given up. He's seeking foreign aid to free Mary, Queen of Scots, and then replace Elizabeth with Mary, Queen of Scots. The plot was discovered in 1571. You see that famous English sailor, John Hawkins. He gained the confidence of the Spanish ambassador to England, who let slip that something was going on. There was also a private letter was sent to Queen Elizabeth I, warning her of the plot. It was sent by none other than Cosimo I de' Medici, Duke of Tuscany. Now, the way the plot was figured, there were going to be 6,000 to 10,000 Spanish troops sent over from the Spanish Netherlands to capture London. Queen Elizabeth would be captured. She would be replaced by Mary, Queen of Scots, who would marry Thomas Howard, 4th Duke of Norfolk. He was the Queen's second cousin. Interestingly, though, Mary, Queen of Scots was still married. So would the Pope annul that marriage? Now, letters were intercepted. Lots of intrigue going on here, and it implicated the Duke of Norfolk. He was arrested. Other people were arrested and then tortured. The whole story is coming out. Mary Queen of Scots now will be really watched because there's evidence that she was in on the plan. But the Duke of Norfolk, his 12-hour trial, so I understand, and he was found guilty of treason on 3 separate accounts. He was executed on Tower Hill on June 1572. Do you know, the crowd were ordered not to make a row. As he climbs the scaffold, the Duke takes off his doublet and he announces to the crowd he was never a Catholic. He lays his head on the block and in complete silence, the head is taken off in one. The Spanish ambassador, by the way, was expelled from England. But Ridolfi, he escaped. You see, he was abroad, never came back to England, and he continued his career as a Florentine banker. The next incident we're going to look at is the barge incident. 1579, Queen Elizabeth I, good Queen Bess, being rowed down the River Thames when she is shot at. A bullet, or was it a crossbow bolt, went straight through the arm of the helmsman. Queen Elizabeth herself takes off her scarf and binds the wound and comforts the wounded helmsman until they get to shore. We don't know for sure what happened. Some say it was a crossbow bolt, others that it was a gun. Some say that it was an attempt on the Queen's life, others that it was a salute from the shore that went wrong, or that it was a foolish youth who was playing with a firearm and it went off. The fact is, we shall never know. All we do know is that in 1579, one way or another, somebody took a shot at the Queen. Next, we're going to look at the Somerville plot. John Somerville, 1583. He was a Catholic landowner and was making his way to London and being quite vociferous, loud as he went. He, in fact, assaulted several people with his sword, so he was armed, and he was proclaiming how he was going to shoot the Queen, cut off her head and mount it on a pike. He was, of course, arrested, but whilst he was arrested, he reiterated his intent to kill the Queen. Under questioning, he implicated his wife, her father, Edward Arden, her mother, a Catholic priest who was acting as the Ardens' gardener, Hugh Hall. What Somerville's idea was, he hoped to kill Queen Elizabeth and have her replaced with Mary, Queen of Scots. During the trial, the women and the priest Hall were actually pardoned, but Arden, as well as Somerville, were found guilty of treason and were executed. Well, Arden was executed, but when they went to get Somerville from his cell, he'd strangled himself, he'd hung himself. So even though he was dead, he was carried up to the scaffold, his head was put on a block, and they cut it off anyhow. Next, we have the Throckmorton plot of 1583. This is just one of a series of plots by English Roman Catholics to depose Elizabeth and replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary was Elizabeth's cousin. She was heir to the English throne through her Tudor grandmother Margaret, Henry VIII's older sister. She'd been under house arrest since 1568, having fled to England from Scotland after her army was defeated at Langside. She fled to England in the hope that Elizabeth would help her regain her throne in Scotland, but Queen Elizabeth had concerns that Mary was implicated in the murder of her husband, Lord Darnley, who was Elizabeth's cousin and also an English subject. Now, the objective of the Throckmorton plan was there would be a Spanish invasion of England. Elizabeth, Queen of England, would be deposed, and Mary, Queen of Scots, would then be the Queen of England, and England would become, once again, a Catholic state. Now, the plot was named after the key conspirator, Sir Francis Throckmorton. He was the cousin of Bess Throckmorton, lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth herself. She later married Sir Walter Raleigh. Now, Francis carried messages from Mary, Queen of Scots, to the Spanish ambassador in London via the French embassy in London, where They were intercepted by an English agent who then notified Francis Walsingham, Secretary of State, of the contents of the messages. Now, part of this plot, which had been uncovered, was the invasion, although it would be a Spanish invasion, would be led by a Frenchman, the Duke of Guise. Now, once they deposed Elizabeth, and Mary, Queen of Scots, was crowned Queen of England, he planned to marry Mary, Queen of Scots, and become King of England. Now, Francis Throckmorton was arrested on November 1583. In his possession at the time of his arrest, he had incriminating documents, and he was in the act of encoding a letter to Mary. Now, just before his arrest, Throckmorton had managed to send a casket full of documents to the Spanish ambassador from Mary, Queen of Scots. And this was exactly what Walsingham wanted him to do. The intelligence was just brilliant. Now, Throckmorton was tortured. He was tortured on the rack on the 16th of November and possibly again on the 19th of November when he confesses to giving information to the Spanish ambassador as to the best places to land a Spanish invasion on the south coast of England, which were the best harbours and ports for the ships to go to. Interestingly, a servant of Mary, Queen of Scots, under interrogation, confessed to writing letters in cipher for Mary, Queen of Scots to the French ambassador, asking him to negotiate a pardon for Francis Throckmorton. This implicates Mary more and more. Throckmorton himself was executed for treason on July 1584. Now, in view of all of this, Mary was placed in strict confinement in Chartley Hall in Staffordshire. Francis Walsingham, together with Lord Burleigh, their joint intelligence network was absolutely incredible. It's no wonder these plots were doomed to failure, but all of their network, their intelligence, that's a story for another day. The following year, 1584, there was yet another attempt on the Queen's life. Well, I say attempt. Let's have a look. William Parry, spy for Lord Burleigh. In 1579, he was in Paris when he covertly joined the Roman Catholic Church. Now, in 1580, he assaulted Hugh Hare, a creditor. He was heavily in debt, and he was sentenced to death, so it must have been quite a serious affair. However, because he'd been in the service, the secret service for the crown, I suppose you'd call it, he was granted a pardon. Now, on another trip abroad, he turned double agent and started to spy for the Catholic side. He now, at this time, considered the possibility of assassinating Elizabeth, Queen of England. Now, upon his return to England in 1584, he somehow disclosed what he'd been up to the Queen. But he claimed he'd been acting as a double agent to cover Protestant plots. It was all this double dealing. The Queen was so impressed with this young man, so she gave him a pension and a seat in the House of Parliament. Now, it was while he was in Parliament that he began to protest against the treatment of Catholics. And it was then he manufactured yet another plot on how to kill Elizabeth. So William Parry now approaches Sir Edmund Neville. The idea is we'll ride up to the Queen in her coach and we'll shoot her. If we fail to do that, then what we'll do is we'll get her in a private audience and then we'll kill her. Now, apparently, Parry did attempt to carry out one of these attempts on the Queen's life, shoot her, but it would appear that he bottled out. His courage failed him. But before he could actually really bring this out, because what I think his intentions were, or so I've read, was he was setting this all up so he could actually get rid of Edmund Neville by saying it was all his idea. I'm grassing him up. However, Neville did it first. He informed on Parry. He was arrested, imprisoned in the Tower of London, where he wrote a full confession to the Queen. Consequently, because he's pleaded guilty, he was expelled from Parliament. He was found guilty of treason, condemned to death by being hanged, drawn, and then quartered. Now, I'm not sure about the first bit, because normally you're drawn on a hurdle to your place of execution. So I'm not sure, because he was actually on trial in Westminster Hall and he was executed in Westminster Palace Yard. He was executed on the 2nd of March, 1585. When he stood on the scaffold about to be partially hanged, he said, "I'm innocent, and please be more gentle with my Catholic friends." Now, later on, a secretary to the French ambassador in London alleged that he carried letters to Parry, and these letters led to the suspicion that all along Mary, Queen of Scots, was involved in this particular plot. Now, one of the most famous plots to assassinate or replace Queen Elizabeth I was the Babington plot of 1585. The idea was that would be a Spanish invasion of England and Mary, Queen of Scots, would replace Elizabeth. And if they couldn't actually replace Elizabeth, there was a secondary plan where she would be assassinated. Now, this all began with John Ballard, a Jesuit priest. He was looking for aid from the northern wealthy Catholic gentry, all on behalf of Mary. Now, on March 1586, he met John Savage, an ex-soldier who got his own separate plot to assassinate Queen Elizabeth. Ballard was resolved in his plot to overthrow Queen Elizabeth, but he enlisted the help in other co-conspirators, Dr. William Gifford, Christopher Hodgson, and Gilbert Gifford. Interestingly, Gilbert Gifford had already been arrested by Walsingham. He was now acting as a double agent. So Walsingham had an agent on the inside all of the time. By the time Savage was going ahead with his idea of assassinating the Queen, Walsingham knew all about it. And Gifford reported to Charles Paget, a Roman Catholic conspirator, and also the ex-Spanish ambassador. Remember him, who'd been expelled over his involvement in the Throckmorton business. Well, Gifford has told them that the English Catholics are prepared to rise up in insurrection against Elizabeth. So those foreign agents now assure Gifford of foreign support. In view of the promised foreign support, John Ballard, the Jesuit priest, persuaded Anthony Babington, one of the Catholic gentry, a wealthy man, that would he lead and organise the English Catholics against Elizabeth. Babington was hesitant. He believed that no invasion would succeed as long as Queen Elizabeth was upon the throne. But Ballard's answer to this was Savage would take care of that. Remember his assassination plot? So Babington agreed to join and lead the conspiracy. Unfortunately for them, Walsingham was aware of the plot due to his spy network, especially Gilbert Gifford. Due to all the evidence that had been gathered, Walsingham could have closed down the plot and arrested the plotters. But he was looking for evidence to see, was Mary, Queen of Scots, involved in the Babington plot? He was also afraid that if he moved too soon, he may make a mistake, and that could put Queen Elizabeth's life at risk. So through Gifford, they introduced a new way, a new system of correspondence for Mary, Queen of Scots, to get correspondence out to her supporters, and likewise her supporters back to Queen Mary. This message system was brilliant. It was simple to get correspondence out. All that Mary had to do was place the correspondence in a waterproof box, which was placed into an empty beer barrel, which was taken out of Chartley. Then a returning full beer barrel would contain a waterproof box of correspondence from her supporters. But all of these messages, all of this correspondence was intercepted by Thomas Phillips, an expert in ciphers and languages. He was in the employ of Walsingham, so he would actually decipher the messages and send everything to Walsingham. He even supplied a code table for Mary to use in her messages. Walsingham read every single message and correspondence from and to Mary. The most damning piece of evidence was when Mary requested to know the names of the 6 gentlemen involved in the conspiracy. But it was the postscript to Mary's letter that was to destroy her. Let the great plot commence. And it was signed by Mary herself. Arrests followed. John Ballard was arrested on the 4th of August 1586. He was tortured and confessed and implicated Anthony Babington in the plot. Anthony could never reply to Mary's letter and postscript because he'd already been arrested. On the 15th of August, Mary's 2 secretaries and a clerk were taken into custody. Also, a large chest containing her papers was seized at Chartley and taken to London as evidence. Babington, together with 13 other co-conspirators, were tried and found guilty of treason and sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered. On the 20th September 1586, the first 7 were executed. I'm going to read their names. We have Anthony Babington and John Ballard, the Jesuit, Chidiock Tichborne, Thomas Salisbury, Robert Barnwell, Henry Donne and John Savage. Now I can do these models, it's a bit of fun, but these men were all hanged, drawn and quartered. It was such a terrible, bloody sight that the people complained. They were horrified by what they seen. Now you imagine that. All those men, was it 7 men, being half hanged, torn apart, screaming, and then their bodies cut up and quartered. The people, they protested against it. So Queen Elizabeth herself, when the next batch of conspirators were found guilty and brought up for execution, she said that they should be hanged until they're properly dead before they are drawn and quartered. Now I've got their names too. And these names are important. They paid the ultimate price. We have Edward Habington, Charles Tilney, Edward Jones, John Charnock, John Travers, Jerome Bellamy, Robert Gage. It's so sad, isn't it? But Mary herself, she will pay the ultimate price. She will be charged with treason, put on trial, and on the 8th of February 1587, in front of 300 witnesses at Fotheringay Castle in Northampton, will be executed by being beheaded. You know, if it wasn't for Walsingham and his spy network, I am sure that Queen Elizabeth I would have succumbed to one of the attempts on her life. Walsingham truly was her shield. But there were other attempts on Elizabeth's life, not poison on a dress like in a certain film. However, there was an attempt by Edward Squire where he was supplied with a certain poison which, working in the Queen's stables, he smeared over the pommel of the Queen's saddle so that when she mounted a horse or held onto the pommel, she would be poisoned. But it didn't work. So he too paid the price for his assassination attempt. He was hanged, drawn and quartered. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, like, share and subscribe. And if you'd like to support our channel further, why not have a look at joining our Patreon community? Now, link is in the description. Right, let's do that one.
Pick it up.
No, I'll do it again. So I'll just play it on his short. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, like, share and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel further, why not have a look at joining our Patreon community? The link is in the description. Now, before I go, I'd like to give a shout out to some of my Patreon members. Now, I've written the names down so I get them right. Here we go. Thanks to Lady Nikita Custer, Christine Anna, and Flyer Bowman. What a name, Flyer Bowman. Hey guys, thanks a million. Bye for now.